Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. The South African mining industry has until October 31st to comment on the first round of recommendations of the Davis Committee on Tax, several of which are seen as having the potential to fundamentally change South Africa's mining landscape for the worse. Martin Creamer joins us to tell us more. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Sashnee.
The Davis Committee has recommended the removal of three crucial pillars. Can you tell us what these are?
Yes, the Davis Committee deadline is looming, and we haven't heard much, coming out of the Chamber of Mines, coming out of the mining industry as to actually how they're going to react to this. We did hear at the Joburg and Durban that it was an issue. The issues facing the industry included the Davis Committee recommendations on tax, and there was some coverage there. But I think that given the magnitude of what is planned here, maybe there should have been far more visibility on what the attitude's all about, because it seems to me that, some of the conditions that have been there for 100 years and more are just going to be dragged away. And one of them is the gold tax formula, which recognizes the vagaries of mining and sort of indicates to you it's not the same as manufacturing, that it's not really good to have a straight tax on that because things change. There's so many variables. And it was the Germans ages ago that recognized this. And, we followed with this gold tax formula. And when you analyze it, you'll find that it's worked out very well over the last 60 odd years, because you'll see that the government and the shareholders virtually were level pegging on what they got out of gold mines. So gold mines have been such an important area for us, and as we heard at the Joburg and Durban, there's still a lot of gold under there, almost as much as we've mined, for 100 years. And are we going to leave it there? Because it seems if this one pillar goes on the tax formula, it seems that we could leave it under the ground there. It could be sterilized underground, which I think would probably not be good for South Africa at this stage, where we've got to hunt every possible avenue of wealth creation. The other pillar is also the deduction on 100% CapEx, capital expenditure up front. They are looking to do away with that and treat mines and, when you're developing something, you're putting out this CapEx early. They want to treat it as if you're buying a computer or something. You write it off over a few years or 5 years, which I remember when they gave that upfront payment to general industry, upfront deduction, how many projects just went ahead like lightning just before, we entered democracy, because I think business thought it'd be good to enter democracy, with a lot of momentum, with quite a bit of project momentum. And that upfront write-off of the CapEx actually stimulated an enormous number of projects. So this is something they also want to remove in these recommendations. Obviously, it's the first round, so hopefully, sanity will prevail as they go down the line, but then also indexation, which is a little bit more complicated. They want to get rid of that as well. So we see that they are in a fairly different mood. I know that, South Africa needs tax, so obviously they focused on getting that tax, so that they put the big emphasis, around revenue collection. But at the same time, their terms of reference don't state that. The terms of reference say to them, look, job creation is huge, yeah. And if you just go for revenue collection in a narrow sense, and you don't take into account the linkages that mining brings, the manufacturing linkages, the service linkages, the infrastructure linkages, you're going to actually deprive the economy of a good ripple effect. So I'm sure that sanity will prevail down the line. But in the meantime, their fixation is give us the money.
And what will be the implication for the mining industry if these recommendations are carried out?
Well, I think that we will have fewer projects, particularly in the gold mining space, because they've targeted that particularly. And also there was a hope that they could migrate, the gold mine formula, tax formula, the gold tax formula, migrated to platinum. But there is a view that there's no such a thing as a marginal platinum mine. Well, that might have been something in the past, but it's certainly not in the present, because I can show them many, many marginal mines. In fact, I can show them quite a few that are underwater. So, the whole era changes, and this is the reality of the mining industry. It's cyclical, it goes up and down, and we were stronger for longer, but the forecast now we're going to be weaker forever. So I think the taxman needs to take that into account, because if you just look at the contribution to gross domestic product, you might say, well, it's 4%, it's not as great as it was in the past. Mining is really also ran. Not so, because if you look at that vital ingredient of, firstly, exports, and we can see how vulnerable our rand is at the moment. If you don't export, you hammer that rand. Mining gives you those exports, and if you don't actually have them at a high volume, then they start to become meaningful as well. So it doesn't bode well for the strength of our rand, but at the same time, we're talking doing more with those metals and minerals in the country, because there was a stage, when we exported so much that our rand was so strong that we suffered from what they call Dutch disease, where you're a miner and only a miner, and you can't do much at home in the manufacturing front because your currency is so strong that when you manufacture something here, you can't export it, and it hurts you. Whereas if you ameliorated that with beneficiation, as they call it, and we did quite a bit of value addition in South Africa, incentivized maybe by government, and to make it expand your minerals cake, you could find that we have the benefit of a weaker rand, plus we have the exports, and then if you create the right environment, you get that magic called foreign direct investment, which is absolutely crucial, which is what our mining industry has lived off, which South Africa has grown by. And the narrow-mindedness of these recommendations of the Davis Committee on Tax, with not a single mining person in sight on the subcommittee, is dangerous for the economy and the future economy and the future of our grandkids, I believe.
KPMG tax head Mohammed Salaju has called for action.
Yes.
What is needed from industry?
He's like the only one that's standing up to be counted here. He's calling to action on just about every front. And, one wonders why we don't see that action. I mean, we've been ourselves asking people, what is your attitude? It's been a bit slow to get reaction. So maybe people want to do this below the radar, especially on the first round. But I think that KPMG's Mohammed Salaju is doing the right thing, because you don't want these recommendations concretized in the second round. They say, well, there's so little reaction to this. Okay, well, let's go. We can now move from this point. We've got a foundation. You don't want that foundation. It's the wrong foundation for this country. It would be the wrong foundation for Australia. I'm sure it would be the wrong foundation for certainly Canada. Where, again, they're rejecting the flow-through scheme. These guys claim they are holier than the flow-through scheme. We had the government come through and, the National Treasury, bless them, they become dictators. And when they say, you won't have this, you don't have this. And although in the budget they promised that, Trevor Manuel promised, he said, we're studying the flow-through scheme, and in the next budget we will introduce something very similar. In fact, they were sold at one stage on the flow-through scheme, which really encourages exploration. And without exploration, you don't have an industry. Really encourages exploration because the tax benefit flows through to the investor. So if I invest in a company on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and that company goes off and drills, those costs that it incurs flow back to me, and I can deduct that from my tax. So it's worked like a bomb in Canada. But the South Africans' National Treasury decided, no, South Africans got a much better idea. And they came out with a gazetted notice, and I remember on the first time it came out, I asked people at Nedbank just to do a quick analysis of it. Well, the one guy went through the whole night studying this thing so he could give me a report back the next morning, and he was so downcast. He said, this is stingy and mingy in the extreme. But of course the National Treasury persisted. Not one single mining company has availed themselves of these so-called incentives that are supposed to be better than Canada. Whereas if you go to Toronto and you look at those skyscrapers, all of those have come around as a result of incentives like this flow-through scheme that really set things in motion. Even the Australians, who don't like taking other people's policies on tax or anything else, they have adopted it now. But the other mining jurisdictions, South Africa, which is doing terribly, we haven't got any exploration to talk of. We've never built a new mine for decades. No, we've got a better scheme. And you'll sit next to the National Treasury and they will still quite hostilely tell you that this is correct, what they're doing. And then you say, well, where are the mining companies? And they'll point to the one right on the top. Now, I know that one right on the top. Initially, they thought, well, let's get in. When they studied this, they said this is parsimonious in the extreme, which is the same as saying it's stingy and mingy in the extreme. And they didn't avail themselves of it. So how can it still be on that list? But then they show you a whole lot of other names. And you say, but who are these people? They're in everything but mining. So why say, you are introducing a mining system when you are not? That is a false impression that the National Treasury is giving. And I think that the National Treasury should sit down, because they're making fools of themselves, and re-look at this, because they must decide whether they want the country to get revenue from its metals and minerals or whether they don't. And if they're so short-sighted, sitting in the Cape there, not knowing what the heck is going on, but still arrogantly push their case, I think someone needs to speak to them, because we've had this situation in the past where they dictate the whole show, and they shouldn't be allowed to.
Thanks for chatting to us, Moodley.
It's a great pleasure.
That's it for today. Join us again next week for more news and analysis on South Africa's mining industry.